Now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be delightful in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. First, may I say what a joy it is to be here. What a joy it is to have all of you together. You who have valiantly offered yourself for the hard work that is ahead of us, and I hope the joyous work that is ahead of us in this synod. Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for the one who has promised is faithful. And let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Now that you all have your great synod bags, you know this is the text we got our theme from. Gather together, encourage one another, provoke to love and good deeds. This passage from Hebrews, which I am sure you will all have memorized by the end of Synod, which is a good thing to be shaped by Scripture, to learn by heart. This text stood out for the planning team as we looked at our purpose for this Synod, of gathering together to strengthen each other in our mission in each community around the diocese. The previous chapters, 6 chapters of the Epistle to the Hebrews, the author carefully, painstakingly outlines the amazing news of Jesus drawing us into a new life of holiness, of right relationship with God, that we can approach God with confidence and assurance of being loved. Because we know this immense and amazing love of God for us and for the world, we live with boldness. We may boldly go where many fear to tread, or where none have gone before. After outlining this God as the true source of our hope, the author then, in this passage, urges a response to this good news, to hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering. Our hope rests in God. It rests in the character of God, God's faithfulness, not ours, God's. And the confession of our hope, as this writer describes it, is to gather, to encourage one another, and to provoke each other to love and good deeds. So our theme is a way to proclaim our hope. Gather, actually maybe I'll just get you to start saying it with me. Gather, provoke to love, encourage one another. A couple of things to note about this. First, it's a response to the grace of God. It's not to earn God's love, that's already there. This is the good news, and I think it bears repeating that because humans turn it upside down, start making it our actions are a way of earning God's love and approval. We are assured of God's faithfulness. We can put away our anxious striving. All our work is joyous response to the faithfulness of God. Notice it says our hope. Hope is a communal thing. In our encouragement of each other, we remind each other of the real source of our hope. To gather in worship each week in your local setting, however it is you gather. And as a diocese, we gather. We've been gathering online in many ways. We gather once every 3 years as a diocese, except during pandemics, to enjoy that encouragement that comes from a wider perspective, from the realization we are not alone. To encourage, to give heart to, is actually what the English word means, to strengthen. The Greek is a whole bunch of things: to call someone to our side, to call for help, to invite them, to entreat or exhort them, to make an appeal to them, help me. And it means to comfort and to cheer up. This weekend of exploring our work and our mission together, the mission that we can accomplish together as a diocese that we could not do on our own, Synod is a way of strengthening each other and maybe cheering each other up, maybe comforting each other. And then this last call to provoke each other to love and good deeds. Provoke is a very startling verb here. There are other translations, but the hope of the planning team is that we would startle each other into that we would hear each other's stories of what God is doing in our midst and what we are doing to respond to what God is doing, to respond in love in the needs of our communities. We hope that we will indeed be strengthened, that hearing each other's stories, our imaginations will be awakened to new possibilities in our own ministries. Communal hope. I've been reading a wonderful book lately by Stephen Charleston, a member of the Choctaw Nation, who's an environmentalist and a theologian and an Episcopal bishop. And the title is, "We Survived the End of the World: Lessons from Native America on Apocalypse and Hope." It is a fascinating examination of the history of how Indigenous peoples, faced with annihilation of culture and language and religion and land and livelihood, faced with their world ending, found ways to regroup, to carry their story and tradition in new containers, story and song and dance, in new containers that could withstand the apocalypse, the end of the world. Because it's an American book, some of the stories were new to me. He tells the story of Tenskwatawa, you can correct me later on the pronunciation, in the early 1800s, who built what he called a city on a hill, a model village of peace. And when that village was destroyed by government forces, he moved it. And again. And again. Model communities of vision that could be moved. That when Indigenous people were pushed off their land, they could carry with them the ideal of the peaceful village, because a community can go anywhere. It was a transportable vision, and it was implanted in the people themselves, so it could survive displacement or oppression or threat. Seeing beyond their former sense of being isolated tribes to being a people, one people in unity. He says that the challenge amidst the fear of apocalypse is that people are tempted to build bunkers. In a society that values self-sufficiency and self-reliance and self-focus, Stevenson says that, Stephen Charleston says, the death of community is actually one of our great inner fears of an apocalypse. We know at our heart that we need community to survive. There is much in this book that demands a whole book study. I'm putting Andrew on warning. This speaks so much of what we can learn from Indigenous resilience about reshaping the church for our time, restructuring so we can carry the gospel of love into an uncertain future, the need to travel lightly, as some have expressed it, to move from being an institution back to being a movement. Followers of Jesus, unencumbered by structures that used to work but no longer serve us. And we will hear more at this Synod of the Thriving Communities tools to help us in that kind of discernment. There's a challenge here to be communities of hope. Charleston speaks of many stories that I won't go into, of how leaders amongst the Indigenous people, as they were faced with annihilation, taught ritual and song and dance as ways to carry the future forward. I thought, well, ritual, song, and dance, 2 out of 3 is not bad. We're really good at ritual, and we will sing lots. Dancing, I don't think we have on the agenda, but I think we do, as a church, have many things that he says are part of being communities of hope in apocalypse. He speaks of our need to build relationship with earth, a relationship of love. That love is the only thing strong enough to sustain the resilience of continuing to work in the face of the threat to earth. And as I read this, I thought of the example of OAC. As we absorbed the news this week that our hope that Okanagan Anglican Camp could have a summer camp this year has proved impossible, we will nonetheless continue tomorrow with a visit to the camp, to sing and to pray, to hear the plans for rebuilding, to begin the Say Yes to Kids fundraising campaign from the Anglican Foundation. Lengthen the vision. I have been amazed by the resilience of Ian Dixon, although this wasn't a surprise, having watched him move through COVID and continue to have camps when most camps had to shut down. Ian, as the camp director, as I read Stephen Charleston's book about hope in an apocalypse, I realized that Ian is an example of the love being the motivator to hang in there. Ian's love for kids, his deep joy in providing a fantastic camping experience for kids, an experience for children of being in a loving, accepting, respectful community, for fun and new skills, of seeing kids grow because of camp. It's Ian's love for the kids that has compelled him forward, even in the midst of grief and trauma and unexpected roadblocks. Charleston says love is at the heart of the resilience and hope that will hang in there and keep going, find a way forward when the path isn't yet clear. And the second thing about the shared diocesan mission to young people through Okanagan Anglican Camp is building a love of nature in the next generations. Awe and wonder and reverence for creation. Experience of nature that forms relationship with the earth. I know I've said this before, but I love doing the faith time at camp. Last year we built nests, and the kids' nests were nowhere near as good as the nests that they saw the birds making with only a beak. So they came away with awe for the skill of the bird weaving together a nest. Charleston says, and I think this is true, that the way we as a society will shift climate change is our love for creation. Only love for creation is strong enough to transform our greed for stuff, our greed that is ruining the planet. May this synod provoke our love for earth. May the long-term vision of a mission that we can share together as a diocese, mission for children and young adults, and I put in brackets elders, because that's part of the dream going forward. May we push for that long-term vision of mission as one way that we can serve our earth. OAC right now, it will be devastating for those of you who've been there before and see 500 trees gone. I was searching through my keys this afternoon and came across my key for the Bishop's Lodge and started to cry. But OAC is, even in all of that, an example of viriditas. Viriditas was Hildegard of Bingen's word for the greening power of God at the heart of creation. I think as we share in a mission of OAC together, as we face the horrors and the cost of climate change, with OAC we get to cooperate with the Earth's own renewal, viriditas. I always think of Hildegard in these first few weeks of spring when there are changes daily from the really almost faint, is it really green kind of color, and then the next day it's more, and the next day, and then suddenly it pops. The deepening shades, and every tree becomes different. There's a freshness and vitality that's miraculous. And this is the power of God, the vibrant life of Creator. And it is our mission and our baptismal vow to safeguard that greening. Over the course of our synod, we will hear another story of viriditas, of the ministry of the gift garden in the central Okanagan region that began at St. Andrew's Mission. That process of discernment, of cooperating with God's mission through listening to the needs of community, being awake to the gifts. And we look forward to that story tomorrow evening with the Reverend Canon Anne Privet and other members of the community. Building community partnerships around a shared passion for feeding the hungry. Saturday evening, we will hear of responses to homelessness in various settings around the diocese, of growing in our compassion for those who suffer most in our housing crisis. We hope there's a variety of large and small stories, and we hope that those will also be encouragement. Part of our provisional mission statement that we adopted last year was for thriving parishes. I want to give you some history of our diocesan work to put perspective on our work this coming weekend. A reminder of where we have been putting our energy in the last couple of years. 2018 Synod, the Parish Futures Initiative was introduced, recognizing that profound changes were afoot. And with the retirement of Bishop John Privet and an interim time, and then far more rapid change than I think any anticipated, plus several clergy retirements, the program was put on hold for a while. And in 2021, Synod picked that work up around the formation of the Structures Working Group. Synod 2021 on Zoom also put in place annual special synods on Zoom that enabled us not to lose momentum so we could adapt to change more quickly. After a time of careful listening and consultation with every parish, in Synod 2022, the Structures Working Group led us through lively discussions about the changes that were happening. And in December of 2022, they presented to us a report called A Path forward, an honest report of structures not serving our mission. Some found that report alarming and some found it freeing. But it wasn't that the church is dying, but that the way we organize ourselves needs to die in some forms, to change radically to fit the current reality. And from that report, last year in May at Synod 2023, we approved the implementation plan, part of which was to hire for at least 2 years a coordinator to implement the plan. Last year at Synod, we approved the funding for the first year. We hired for that position in October 2023. I renamed it to a more descriptive Director of Missional Renewal, Coordinator of Implementation, which is what the Synod minute says is kind of what. So we will hear and discuss this work in the diocese with 2 presentations, 2 workshops, Friday and Saturday mornings. I do want us to notice that being able to have annual gatherings in between our in-person synods has helped us to speed up our response and to gather more frequently to hear and to make decisions. On Saturday, we will discuss a resolution regarding the structure, rhythm, and purpose of these annual sessions of Synod. They need clarifying. We thought at Synod last year that we would begin this past year to look at some of the canonical changes needed, but as we looked into it, we weren't ready yet to formulate what those changes might be. Some suggested structural change require looking at the canons, probably served us well in the past, but don't work anymore. That will be some of our discussion on Saturday. And one example of this is, we live in we're divided in the diocese into geographical regions, and there are 5 very, very different kind of models of how that takes shape. In some circumstances, like West Kootenay, they continue exploring an area parish model. The South Okanagan region has only 1 paid clergy at this time. So other parishes are stepping up to a challenge of living with no clergy, lay leadership in worship and community life, exploring partnerships, working on the tools that have arisen out of the Structures Working Group report. Andrew will walk us through more discernment about those regions. And there will be discussion on Saturday afternoon and consideration of a resolution to form a non-geographical region of all the 6 ecumenical shared ministries so that they can support each other in their common situation. And I hope that exploring that will kind of push our imaginations for some other way of structuring regions. The Thriving Parishes is also a work of resourcing parishes in transition. Bishop Anna Greenwood apparently told her synod a couple weeks ago, "You're either in transition or you're in denial." This has meant, as we've looked at how do we equip leadership for parishes in transition, parishes without clergy, we have had wardens workshop. We have a treasurers workshop coming up in June with Christopher Parsons, our new executive archdeacon, with Sheila, the diocesan treasurer, and Teresa, our diocesan finance person. With Pam Harris, who is our licensed lay ministry coordinator, and the whole ministry committee, trying to figure out how we better equip lay leaders to lead worship. We won't say who, but there's one congregation that's having such excitement about lay-led worship in their parish that they've stepped back and said, well, we don't know if we even need a priest. Don't be frightened, clergy. The work of theologically trained, ordained ministry will not disappear, but yes, it will change. I hear this around the House of Bishops, circuit rider bishops. circuit rider priests, multiple teams, area parishes. I have appointed the Reverend Doug Lewis as coordinator of Kootenay Ministry Formation as we seek to strengthen the education of lay people for congregational leadership. I do not call lay leaders volunteers. They are disciples. They are equally called to ministry. It is work as the diocese together. The diocese is us. It is our shared work to equip disciples for the ministry, for building that capacity, again, to weather the changes. Douglas is working as a liaison with WECAN, the Western Educational Coalition Anglican Network, and several other theological schools and dioceses who do lay training. So much is available online, and it gives us an enhanced pool of teachers and a bigger learning community. Christy Arndt, a theologically trained laywoman in the diocese, who is on the Diocesan Spiritual Development Committee, attended on our behalf as the Diocese of Kootenay and on behalf of WECAN, a national conference on strengthening spiritual formation for lay people. So watch the space for her workshops coming up. The book study, When Church Stops Working, that we held in January, had 80 participants on Zoom between the two different groups we had. Watching the excitement of the conversations between different leaders from across the diocese filled me with joy. Here was encouragement of community, the sharing of ideas, the recognition that the decline in numbers and the struggle with aging leaders was in many parishes. Not just us, one person said. Not because we're doing something wrong, said another person, and nods of heads. And perhaps my favorite, as we discussed the book's encouragement to simply be as the community you are, to worship together and enjoy your community the way it actually is, to celebrate what's there, that glorious good news. One deeply committed and energetic lay leader said, I think then I'll just relax. Back to our theme of trusting in the faithfulness of God. We will hear tomorrow about Education for Ministry, EFM, the long, in-depth biblical training that continues, that our diocese has relied on for decades. We will hear tomorrow from Annette Cowan, the director of EFM Canada. It's still an important pillar in our education for discipleship. I led one session of training for doing Lectio Divina Bible study in a congregation, either as a reflection on the word during worship instead of a sermon, or as a parish study. And I confess that at the end of one evening, as people had experienced the simplicity of that model, as we were reflecting on how could it work in their setting, as they joyfully waved goodbye on Zoom to new people that they had just met from across the diocese, after we said the doxology and I left the Zoom room, I turned to Gerald, who'd been sitting reading through all of this. I turned to Gerald with tears in my eyes, and I said, there, as the structures of the church disappear, everyone in all of those parishes can and will continue worship and Bible study. Gathering, encouraging, provoking each other to love. Being joyful communities of hope. Of hope and therefore resilience and service as we respond to the world. I think this has always been our calling. I just think it's maybe more right in our face. how to be communities of hope in an apocalypse, when the world as we know it is shifting so radically and is filled with fear. How can we be communities of hope? We will at the Synod hear about the partnerships and structural change we are building at a provincial level. Again, sharing resources and partnerships, ministries like refugee sponsorship that we simply cannot do by ourselves, even as a diocese, let alone as parishes. The universe is unfolding. The center still is holding. The center of our hope is the self-giving love of God, the Christ of compassion and mercy, the grace and love at the heart of the universe. May we hold fast to that hope. As we gather at the Synod in the confidence of that hope, may we indeed encourage each other, provoke each other to love and good deeds. Thanks be to God.